I related all I had seen to Conseil and Ned. My companions were not less astonished than I had been. "But where does he take his millions to?" asked Ned Land. This we could not answer. After breakfast I went into the saloon and sat down to work. Till 5 p.m. I was arranging my notes when I suddenly felt a great heat, and I was glad to take off my outer garments of byssus. This heat was extraordinary in effect, for we were not in tropic latitudes, and besides, the Nautilus, being under water, could not be affected in any case. I looked at the manometer. We were at a depth of 60 feet, to which the heat of the air could not reach. I continued to work, but the heat became intolerable. "Is the ship on fire?" I thought. I was about to leave the saloon when Captain Nemo entered. He looked at the thermometer and, turning to me, said, 42 degrees. "So I see, Captain, and if the heat increases, we shall not be able to bear it." "It will not get hotter if we do not like it." "You can reduce it, then, if you wish, Captain?" "No, but I can go farther from the cause of it." "Is it, then, outside the ship?" "Certainly. We are floating in a current of boiling water." "Is it possible?" I exclaimed. "Look." The panels were opened, and I could perceive that the sea was quite white around the Nautilus. A sulphurous vapor rolled amid the waves, which boiled like water in a copper. I placed my hand against one of the windows, but the heat was so great I had to withdraw it. "Where are we?" I asked. "Close to the island of Santorin," replied the captain, "and in the canal which separates Nea Kamenni from Palea Kamenni. I wish to let you see a submarine eruption." "I thought that this formation of new islands had ceased," I said. "Nothing is ever at an end in volcanic localities," replied Captain Nemo, "and the globe is always being moved by these subterranean fires. According to Cassiodorno and the Pliny, a new island, Thera, the Divine, appeared in the very place in which these islands have been formed, about the 19th year of our era. Then we sank to rise again in 69, and again disappeared. Since then, in our time, the Plutonian work has been suspended. But on the 3rd of February, 1866, a new island, called George Island, rose near Nea Kamenni, and disappeared upon the 6th of the same month. 7 days after, the island of Aphroessa appeared, leaving a passage of about 20 yards wide between it and Nea Kamenni. I was in these seas when it happened, and was able to observe the phases. The island of Aphroessa was a rounded form, measured 300 feet across and 30 feet in height. It was composed of a black and vitreous lava, mingled with feldspar. Finally, on the 10th of March, a similar island called Rekka arose close to Nea Kamenni, and since these 3 islands have been united. "And the canal in which we now are?" I asked. "There it is," replied Captain Nemo, indicating it on a map of the archipelago. "You see that I have put down all the newest islands." "But this canal will some day be filled up, surely?" "Very likely, Monsieur Anorax, for since 1866, 8 little islands of lava have risen opposite the harbor of St. Nicholas in Palea Kamenni. It is, therefore, evident that Nea and Palea will be joined together some day. If in the Pacific there are infusoria, which form continents, here it is by eruptive phenomena. You can see, sir, what work is being done beneath the waves." I turned to the window. The Nautilus was not going fast. The heat became almost unbearable. The white appearance of the sea had given place to a red tinge, which color was due to salts of iron. Notwithstanding the hermetic ceilings of the saloon, an almost insupportable smell of sulphur was present, and I could perceive that the bright red of the flames completely overcame the electric light. I felt in a bath. I was choking. I was almost broiled. I really did feel as if I were cooking. "We cannot remain in this boiling water any longer," I said. No, replied the captain calmly. It would be scarcely prudent. An order was passed along. The Nautilus went about and soon left the surface at a distance. A quarter of an hour later, we were breathing at the surface of the sea. It occurred to me that if Ned Land had selected those places to make his escape in, we should never emerge alive from the fiery seas. The following day, February 16th, we left the basin between Rhodes and Alexandria, which can boast of a depth of about 4,500 yards, and the Nautilus giving Cerigo a wide berth, doubled Cape Matopan, and left the Greek archipelago astern. Oh, it looks like the stream dropped for a moment. I apologize for that. Just going to quickly take a drink. Oh, okay. Sorry, that was just my sister who was watching the stream telling me that the stream dropped about 10 minutes ago. Yeah. So I apologize. On YouTube, this is going to be just a tiny bit choppy from last stream and this stream. Well, from the last video to this video. I hope that not much was lost. Chapter 7, The Mediterranean in 48 Hours. The Mediterranean, the blue sea par excellence, the great sea of the Hebrews, the sea of the Greeks, the Mare Nostrum, the Mare Nostrum of the Romans, bordered by orange trees, aloes, cactus, pines, perfumed with myrtle, enclosed by rude mountains, enveloped with a pure and transparent atmosphere, but ever worked by the earth's fires, is a regular battlefield of Neptune and Pluto disputing for the empire of the world. It is here on its banks, as in on its waters, says Michelet, that man acquires new vigor in one of the most wonderful climates in the world. But beautiful though it be, I could only indulge in a very hasty glance. The personal experience of Captain Nemo failed me here, for that extraordinary personage did not appear once during the passage through which we made it at full speed. I estimated the distance that the Nautilus ran under the water was about 600 leagues, and she performed it in 8 and 40 hours. We left the Grecian archipelago at the 16th of February, and on the 18th, at sunrise, we had passed the Strait of Gibraltar. It was evident to me that Captain Nemo did not like being surrounded by these countries he wished to avoid. The winds and waves carried too many souvenirs, if not regrets of his mind. Here he did not possess the same liberty of motion as in the ocean, and his Nautilus was in a strait, so to speak, between Europe and Africa. Our speed was about 25 miles an hour. It is needless to say that Ned Land, to his great disappointment, was obliged to renounce his plan of escape. It was of no use to think of launching the boat at the pace we were traveling. To leave the Nautilus under these circumstances was like jumping off of a train at full speed, which is not the most prudent thing to do at any time. Besides, the ship only came to the surface during the night to renew the air, and was solely guided by the compass and the log. Therefore I saw no more of the Mediterranean than a traveler by express can see the country through which he passes. Nevertheless, Conseil and I were able to note some of the Mediterranean fish, whose swimming powers enabled them to keep alongside the Nautilus for a few moments. My notes enabled me to reproduce some account of the ichthyology of this sea. Of the many fish inhabiting it, I saw some, and only caught a glimpse of others, so I must class them in a somewhat fantastic manner. Amongst these, surrounded by our light, were lampreys, about 3 foot long, which are common to all seas, Oxyrhynchia, a kind of ray, about 5 feet wide, with white bellies spread out like shawls carried along by the current. Other rays passed so quickly that I could not ascertain whether they were the eagles of the Greeks or the rat, frog, and bat, which modern fishermen have dubbed them. Sea foxes, several feet long and gifted with acute scent, came along like a great blue shadow. Doradus got up in blue and silver, sacred to Venus, the eyes chased with a gold penciling, a precious species, but suited to either salt or fresh water, living in all climates and all temperatures, and though belonging to the geological era, I have perceived all their pristine beauty. Magnificent sturgeons, 10 or 11 yards long, of great speed in knocking their powerful tails against the windows of the saloon, showed their bluish back spotted with brown. They are like sharks, though inferior in strength, and are found in all seas. In the spring they like to ascend great rivers like the Volga, the Danube, the Po, the Rhine, the Loire, the Oder, living on herrings, mackerels, etc. But of the various inhabitants of the Mediterranean, those which I could see best were the 63rd genus of osseous fish. These are tunny, with blue-black backs. They are stated to follow ships in search of the refreshing shade from the fiery tropical sky, and they certainly proved the saying, for they followed the Nautilus just as they followed the ships of La Pérouse. For hours they emulated the speed of our ship. I could not help admiring them. They seemed so built for speed. Small head, lissom body, fins of great power and forked tails. They swam in a triangle, as some birds fly, but with all their speed they do not escape the Provençals, and these blind and stupid yet precious creatures throw themselves by millions into the nets of the Marseillais. I could quote numbers of other fish, gymnotes, congers of 4 yards length, trigals, red mullet, the ocean bird of paradise, and if I did not put down ballista, tetradons, hippocampus, blennies, and numerous others, it is because the speed of the Nautilus made it impossible to note them accurately. I fancied I saw at the entrance of the Adriatic 2 or 3 cachalots, some dolphins of the genus Globicephali, peculiar to the Mediterranean, the back of the head being variegated with small lines, and some seals known as monks, and which have really something of the appearance of a Dominican. Conseil thought he saw a tortoise 6 feet wide. I was sorry I had not noticed it, for, from Conseil's description, I believed it to be the luth, which is very rare. I only remarked a few caconans, with elongated shell coverings. As regards zoophytes, I was able to admire for some minutes an admirable orange-colored Galcoria, which had attached itself to the panel of the port side. I, unfortunately, was unable to secure this splendid specimen, and perhaps no other Mediterranean zoophytes would have presented themselves if the Nautilus, during the evening of the 16th, had not unexpectedly slackened speed under the following circumstances. We were passing between the coasts of Sicily and Tunis. In this narrow space, between Cape Bon and the Strait of Messina, the bottom of the sea rose very suddenly. I've actually been to Messina. A regular reef had formed, above which there was not 60 feet of water. The Nautilus had therefore to move very carefully so as not to knock against the reef. I pointed out to Conseil the position of the reef on the chart. But if Monsieur has no objection, this is a regular isthmus uniting Europe to Africa. Yes, I replied, it is a perfect bar of the Libyan Straits, and the soundings of Smith have proved that those continents were formerly united between Cape Bocco and Cape Fornia. "I can easily believe it," replied Conseil. "I may add that a similar reef existed between Ceuta and Gibraltar. These bars in the geological epoch completely shut in the Mediterranean." "Ah," said Conseil, "and suppose some volcanic action should raise these reefs again?" "That is scarcely possible." "At least, if Monsieur will allow me to finish, if this should happen, it will be very awkward for Monsieur de Lesseps, who has taken so much trouble to cut the Suez Channel." "I agree with you, Conseil, but I repeat, I do not think it likely to happen. The violence of the subterranean forces is always diminishing. The volcanoes, so common in early ages, are now comparatively few. The interior heat is dying out. The temperature of the Earth's strata is being lowered appreciably every century, and to the detriment of our globe. For this heat is life. Yet the sun is not enough, Conseil. Can it warm a corpse? No, I should say not. Well, my friend, the earth will one day become a cold body. It will become uninhabitable and uninhabited, like the moon, which has long ago lost its vital heat." "In how many centuries?" asked Conseil. "In some hundreds of thousands of years." "Then," said Conseil, "we have still time to complete our voyage, if Ned Land does not interrupt us." And Conseil, reassured, applied himself to the study of the high bank that the Nautilus was skirting at a moderated pace. There, beneath a rocky and volcanic soil, was outspread a living flora of sponges, holotines, cypades, ornamented with ruddy foliage which emitted a slight phosphorescence. Heraways, commonly known as sea cucumbers, and bathed in glittering light of a solar spectrum, walked comatula, a yard long, whose purple hue colored the water. Conseil occupied himself chiefly in observing the mollusks and the articulates. Time failed him to complete the crustacea by the examination of the stomatids, the amphipods, and the homopodies and trilobites, the brachiopores, the ostracods, and the entomostasis. But the Nautilus, having passed the high bank on the right of the African coast, redescended into deep water and proceeded at her full speed. No more mollusks, no more articulates, no more zoophytes. Only a few large fish passed us like great shadows. During the night of the 16th to the 17th February, we entered the second Mediterranean basin, whose great depth is 3,000 yards. The Nautilus descended almost to the very bottom. There, in default of natural wonders, the great mass of waters offered me very moving and terrible scenes. We were then traversing that portion of the Mediterranean so fertile in shipwrecks. From the Algerine coast to Provence, what vessels have disappeared. The Mediterranean is like a lake compared to the Pacific, but it is a capricious and changeful lake. Today smiling and beautiful, tomorrow raging, roaring, and swept by furious winds, disabling the finest vessels and smashing them against its precipitous rocks. So in this rapid transit, at these innumerable depths, I could perceive anchors, cannonballs, iron utensils, threads of screws, pieces of the engine, cylinders, boilers, hulls floating midway, some upright, some overturned. Of these shipwrecked vessels, some had been injured by collision, others from striking on the rocks. I saw some which had gone down all standing. They looked as if they were at anchor in a foreign harbor and were waiting the signal to depart. When the Nautilus passed between them and wrapped them in the electric light, it seemed as if these ships were going to salute the flag and hoist their numbers. But no, nothing but the silence of death reigned in this scene of a great catastrophe. I noticed that towards Gibraltar these sinister traces became more numerous. The coasts of Europe and Africa get closer here, and the meetings were more frequent. I perceived numerous iron hulls, remains of steamers, some careened over, some upright, like some formidable animals. One of these vessels presented a terrible spectacle. How many had gone down with her? Who of all those on board had survived to tell the tale, or did the waves still guard this terrible secret? I do not know why, but it occurred to me that this was the Atlas, which had disappeared about 20 years ago, and of which no one had ever heard. Ah, what fearful history might be written about these depths, this vast mortuary of the Mediterranean, where so much wealth has been lost, and where so many victims have found death. But the Nautilus, indifferent to this, continued her rapid course amid all this ruin. On the 18th of February, about 3 a.m., she entered the Straits of Gibraltar. Here 2 currents exist, the upper long known, which takes the water from the ocean into the Mediterranean, the other in the opposite direction, of which reason has proved the existence. In fact, the bulk of the Mediterranean waters, incessantly increased by the Atlantic and by the rivers it receives, would raise each year to the level of the sea, for its evaporation is not sufficient to establish the equilibrium. Now it is not so, and the existence of an undercurrent is only natural, and this current empties the surplus water of the Mediterranean into the Atlantic through the Straits of Gibraltar. This is a fact, and the Nautilus took advantage of this current. It rapidly advanced. For an instant I caught sight of the beautiful ruins of the Temple of Hercules, according to Pliny and Avianus, buried with the island that supported it, and a few moments later we were floating in the waves of the Atlantic Ocean. Looks like we have time for one more chapter. Yeah, I think 2 chapters would be making it run a bit long, and I want to do my game stream on time. Hold on just a moment. Chapter 8, Vigo Bay. The Atlantic, a vast expanse of water whose superficial area covers 25 millions of square miles, is 9,000 miles long, and has an average breadth of 2,700 miles. This enormous ocean was almost unknown to the ancients, unless the Carthaginians, perhaps, who, in their commercial progression, followed the coasts of Europe and Africa. An ocean whose winding and parallel shores embraced an immense area, supplied by the largest rivers in the world, the St. Lawrence, the Mississippi, the Amazon, La Plata, Orinoco, Niger, Senegal, Elbe, Loire, Rhine, which bear their waters to it through the most civilized and also through the most barbarous countries. A magnificent sheet of water plowed by vessels over which the flag of every nation waves, and which is bounded by those 2 points so terrible to sailors, the Cape Horn and the Cape of Storms. The Nautilus was cutting her way through these waters, having made 10,000 leagues in 3 months and a half, a distance greater than one of the earth's great circles. Whither were we now bound, and what had the future in store for us? The Nautilus, having cleared the straits, kept well in the offing. We came to the surface, and our daily airings on the platform were resumed. I ascended at once, accompanied by Conseil and Ned Land. Cape St. Vincent appeared about 12 miles away. The wind was blowing stiffly from the south. The sea was very rough indeed, and the Nautilus rolled tremendously. It was almost impossible to stand upon the platform, which was swept by the waves almost every instant. We descended, therefore, after having taken in a few mouthfuls of fresh air. I retired to my room. Conseil went to his cabin also, but the Canadian, who appeared preoccupied, followed me. Our rapid passage through the Mediterranean had not permitted him to put his design into execution, and he did not conceal his disappointment. When he had closed the door, he sat down and contemplated me in silence. "Friend Ned," I said, "I understand you, but you have nothing to reproach yourself with. Under the circumstances in which the Nautilus has worked, it would have been utter folly to have attempted to leave it." Ned made no reply. His compressed lips and lowering brow showed how deeply the idea of escape possessed him. "But," said I, "we will not despair. We are coasting up by Portugal. France and England are not far off, where we may easily find refuge. If the Nautilus has gone southward after clearing the straits, we should have been again carried away into the mid-ocean, and I should have shared your uneasiness. But we know that Captain Nemo does not fear these frequented seas, and in a few days I believe we shall be in safety." Ned Land gazed at me still more intently, and at length opened his lips and said, "It is for this evening." I jumped up. I was, I confess, unprepared for such a communication. I could not reply. "It was arranged to wait an opportunity. It is at hand. This evening we shall be only a few miles from the Spanish coast. The night will be dark. The wind is high. You promised, Monsieur Anorak, and I depended upon you." As I still was silent, the Canadian rose and came towards me. "Tonight, at 9 o'clock, said he. "I have warned Conseil. At that time Captain Nemo will be shut in his own room, and most likely asleep. Neither the engineers nor the crew will be able to see us. Conseil and I will gain the center staircase. You, Monsieur Anorax, will remain in the library close by till I give the signal. The oars, masts, and sail are in the launch. I have even succeeded in laying in some provisions, and I have got an English key to undo the bolts which fasten the boat to the Nautilus. You see, all is prepared. This evening, mind." "The sea is very rough," I said. "I know that," replied the Canadian. "But we must risk it. Our freedom is worth a little danger. But the boat is strong, and a few miles with a favorable wind is nothing after all. Who knows? By tomorrow we may be 100 leagues away. If only fate be propitious. By 10 or 11 tonight we shall have landed somewhere or be dead. Therefore, until the evening, adieu." The Canadian retired, leaving me speechless. I had fancied that, the chance once gone, I should have had time to reflect or discuss the point. My obstinate companion would not allow this, but, after all, what could I have said? Ned Land was right, 100 times right. Here was a chance of an opportunity, and he was taking advantage of it. Could I retract my position and assume the responsibility to compromise my companions by my selfishness? Tomorrow Captain Nemo might take us out to the sea again. At this moment a loud hissing noise made me aware that the reservoirs were filling. The Nautilus was descending beneath the Atlantic waves. I remained in my room. I wished to avoid the captain, to hide from him the emotion that overcame me. I passed a very wearying day, and left my submarine studies as I was balanced between the desire of liberty and my regret at quitting the Nautilus. To quit this ocean, my Atlantic as I like to call it, without having visited its greater depths, without having gained its secrets, while the Indian and Pacific Oceans had yielded theirs. My romance fell from my hand at the first volume. My dream was interrupted at the most pleasant moment. What unhappy hours I passed thus! Sometimes picturing myself and my companions in safety, sometimes hoping against my own reason that something would prevent Ned Land's project from being carried out. Twice I came into the saloon. I wanted to look at the compass. I wished to see in what direction the Nautilus was going, whether bringing us nearer to or taking us farther from the coast. But there was no chance. We continued in Portuguese waters. I must therefore make up my mind to depart. My baggage was not excessive, only my notes. I wondered what Captain Nemo would think of our flight. What unhappiness, what evil might it not bring upon him, and how would he act in either event, on success or failure? I had certainly no cause to complain of this conduct. On the contrary, he was hospitality itself. But in leaving the ship I could not be taxed with ingratitude. I was bound by an oath. He depended on circumstances, and not upon any promise to keep us with him. But this claim, which openly avowed his intentions to keep us prisoners forever, quite justified our attempt to escape. I had not seen the captain since our visit to the island of Santorin. Would chance bring us together before we escaped? I desired, and yet feared, the meeting. I listened to hear if he were walking up and down in his room. I heard no sound. The room must be empty. Then I began to wonder whether he were on board. Since the evening that the boat had left the Nautilus on some mysterious service, my idea had been slightly modified concerning him. I fancied, and I wish I could say so, that Captain Nemo still kept up some communication with the earth. Would he never leave the Nautilus altogether? Weeks had passed without our meeting. What did he do in that time? And while I believed him a prey to misanthropy, might he not be at a distance carrying out some secret plans? All these and 1,000 similar ideas crowded my brain. Conjecture could be infinite under such circumstances. I was terribly uneasy. The day appeared interminable. The hours struck too slowly for my impatience. My dinner was served as usual in my room. I ate little. I left the table at 7 o'clock. 120 minutes more separated me from the moment I was to join Ned Land. My agitation increased. My pulse beat violently. I could not rest a moment. I moved about in the hope to calm my mind by so doing. The idea of non-success was the least painful of my cares, but the thought of having our enterprise discovered before we quitted the ship, of being arraigned before Captain Nemo, irritated, or what would be even worse, sad at my abandonment of him, made my heart beat painfully. I wished to take a last look at the saloon. I gazed at all its riches and treasured specimens, like one on the brink of exile, and who was never to see these things again, those marvels of nature, the masterpieces of art, amongst which my life had moved on for so long. Was I about to abandon them forever? I wished to take a glance through the windows across the Atlantic waves, but the panels were closed, and an iron clock separated me from the ocean, which I should no longer know. As I wandered around the saloon, I reached a door that opened into the captain's room. To my great surprise, it was ajar. I drew back involuntarily. If Captain Nemo were in his room, he would see me. However, not hearing any noise, I approached the room. It was empty. I pushed the door and entered. All was still and plain of aspect as ever. Just then some engravings, which I had not noticed in my previous visit, attracted my attention. They were portraits of men renowned in history, whose existences have been devoted to some grand aim. Kosciuszko, the Pole, Botzaris, the Leonidas of modern Greece, O'Connell, the Irish patriot, Washington, the founder of the American Republic, Maine, the Italian patriot, Lincoln, who fell by the assassin's bullet, and finally that martyr to the freedom of the black races, John Brown, depicted on the gibbet as drawn with such terrible truthfulness by Victor Hugo. What fellow-feeling existed between these heroic souls and the mind of Captain Nemo? Could I now unravel the mystery of his existence? Was he a champion of an oppressed people, the liberator of a race of slaves? Had he taken part in the later political and social commotions of the century? Was he one of the heroes of that terrible, lamentable, yet glorious American War? The clock struck 8. The sound of the first stroke roused me from my dreaming. I trembled as if some invisible eye had read my most secret thoughts, and I hurriedly left the room. In the saloon, my eye fell upon the compass. We were still going north. The log indicated a moderate speed. The manometer gave a depth of about 60 feet. These circumstances were favorable for the Canadian's plan. I regained my room. I clothed myself warmly, sea boots, a cape of otter skin, a coat of byssus lined with sealskin. I was ready, waiting. The vibrations of the screw alone broke the profound silence that reigned through the ship. I listened more attentively. Would no uproar tell me that Ned Land had failed? A mortal uneasiness was upon me. I in vain endeavored to assume my usual coolness. It was nearly 9 o'clock. I put my ear close to the door of the captain's room. No sound whatever. I left my room and entered the saloon, which was rather dark, but quite deserted. I opened the door communicating with the library. The same semi-obscurity reigned here, but there was sufficient light. I placed myself close to the door opening to the central staircase. Here I waited Ned Land's signal. At this moment the beatings of the screw diminished sensibly, then ceased altogether. Why this change in pace of the Nautilus? Whether this stoppage would facilitate or prevent the designs of Ned Land, I could not imagine. I could hear no sound but the throbbing of my heart. Suddenly, a slight shock was felt, and I perceived that the Nautilus had grounded at the bottom of the ocean. My uneasiness increased. The Canadian made no sign. I had a great mind to join Ned Land and induce him to forego his attempt to escape. I felt that our progress was no longer being made under ordinary conditions. The door of the saloon now opened, and Captain Nemo appeared. He perceived me, and without preamble addressed me. "Ah, Professor, I was seeking you. Do you know your Spanish history?" One might know the history of one's own country perfectly, while, under the conditions in which I then was, mind upset and head in a whirl, one could not recall a fact. "Well," repeated Captain Nemo, "did you hear my question? Do you know Spanish history?" "Not very well," I replied. "There are savants, then," said the captain. "Who knows?" There are savants, then, who know. Well, sit down, for I am going to relate to you a curious episode in this history." The captain lay down upon a sofa. Mechanically, I sat beside him. "Listen attentively, monsieur, if you please," he said. "This history will interest you, for it will answer a question you have, no doubt, not yet been able to solve." "I am listening, Captain," I replied, not knowing what he was leading up to, and whether he was about to touch upon our projected escape. "If you have no objections," said Captain Nemo, "we will go back to the year 1702. You are aware that at that time your King Louis the 14th, thinking that his gesture was enough to bring the Pyrenees into his kingdom again, imposed his grandson, the Duke of Anjou, on the Spaniards. This prince, who reigned more or less badly under the name of Philippe V, had to do with a strong party abroad. In fact, in the preceding year Holland, Austria, and England had concluded a treaty of alliance at The Hague, with the view to snatch the crown from Philippe V and bestow it upon an archduke, whom they prematurely designated Charles III. Spain felt she ought to resist this, but she was almost deprived of soldiers and sailors. However, money would be forthcoming if only all these galleons laden with gold and silver could arrive from America. Now, towards the end of 1702, the Spaniards awaited a rich convoy which France was escorting by a fleet of 23 ships under the command of Admiral Chateau Renaud. for the combined fleets were already in the Atlantic. This convoy was to arrive at Cadiz, but the admiral, hearing that the English fleet was cruising in the neighborhood, resolved to enter a French port. The Spanish officer protested against this. They asked to be conducted into a Spanish port, if not Cadiz, Vigo, situated in the northeast coast of Spain, and which was not blockaded. Admiral Chateau Renaud was weak enough to comply, and the galleons entered Vigo Bay. Unfortunately, this bay forms an open roadstead which could not be defended. It was then necessary to hurry on the discharge of the galleons before the arrival of the hostile fleet, and plenty of time was available for the operation, had not a petty question of precedence arisen. "Are you following the facts?" asked Captain Nemo. "Perfectly," I said, not knowing how all this was to be applied to me. "Well, then, this is what occurred. The Cadiz merchants had a privilege according to which they were to receive all merchandise which came from the West Indies. Now, to disembark ingots at Vigo was against their privileges. They, therefore, lodged a complaint that Madrid had obtained from the weak Philip V permission for the convoy to remain in sequestration in the roadstead of Vigo until the hostile fleet had disappeared from the neighborhood. But while this decision was being arrived at, the English fleet appeared in Vigo Bay. Admiral Chateau Renaud, notwithstanding his inferior force, gave them battle. But when he saw that the convoy was likely to fall into the enemy's hands, he burnt and sunk the galleons, which went to the bottom with the immense treasure on board." Captain Nemo paused. I could not yet perceive how this history could interest me. "Well," I said. "Well, sir," replied Captain Nemo, "we are now in Vigo Bay, and, if you please, you can penetrate its mysteries." He rose and begged me to accompany him. I had had time to recover myself. I obeyed. The saloon was dark, but the sea scintillated before the windows. I looked out. All round the Nautilus, to a distance of perhaps half a mile, the sea appeared to be illuminated by electric light. The sandy bottom was clear and distinct. Some of our crew, in their diving dresses, were engaged in clearing rotten barrels and empty chests from the wrecks. From these barrels and cases, ingots of gold and silver were escaping, cascades of money and jewels. They were piled up in the sand. Then, laden with their booty, the men returned to the Nautilus, and, depositing their loads, went back for another haul in its inexhaustible fishery of silver and gold. I understood it all. This was the scene of the battle of the 22nd October, 1702. It was here that the galleons laden for the Spanish government had been sunk. Here Captain Nemo was enabled to secure, as he chose, millions to ballast the Nautilus. 'Twas for him, and him alone, that America had yielded that precious metal. He was the sole heir to these treasures, torn away from Incas and from the conquered people of Fernandez Cortez. Were you ever aware that the sea contained such riches, Professor? I've heard that the silver in suspension in these waters has been estimated at 2 million. No doubt, but to extract the silver, the expenses would carry away all profit. Here, on the contrary, I have only to collect what has been lost, and not only here, but at the scenes of 1,000 other shipwrecks which I have noted on the chart. Now do you perceive why I am so rich? Yes, Captain, but allow me to inform you that, in exploring the Bay of Vigo, you are only a little ahead of a rival. What is that? The Society has received from the Spanish government the privilege to seek for these sunken galleons. The shareholders are attracted by the promise of a large booty, for which they value the contents of these ships at 500 million. They were 500 million, replied Captain Nemo, but they are not so now. In fact, then, said I, a warning to these shareholders would only be a charitable action, but how would it be received? That which gamblers regret above all usually is less the loss of their money than that of their foolish expectations. I pity them less, after all, than the numbers of unhappy people to whom so much treasure, well bestowed, would have been a boon, while they will be forever useless to them. No sooner had I made this remark than I felt it had wounded Captain Nemo. "Unless," he said with animation, "do you imagine, monsieur, that these treasures are lost because I gather them? It is for myself, as you imagine, that I give myself all this trouble to collect this wealth? Who has told you that I do not make a good use of it all? Do you think I do not know what suffering people and oppressed races exist on the earth, unhappy ones to console and victims to avenge? Do you not understand?" Captain Nemo checked himself, regretting, perhaps, that he had said so much, but I had guessed. Whatever the motives that had forced him to seek freedom on the ocean, after all, he was a man of heart. His bosom throbbed for the sufferings of mankind, and his unlimited charity was extended to oppressed races as well as to individuals. And I understood then to whom these millions were forwarded by Captain Nemo, when the Nautilus was cruising in the neighborhoods of the Crete insurgents. And with the end of that chapter, we're going to end story time for now. I'm going to take a small break, and then when we come back, it will be game stream time. We're going to be playing Luna. And I'm trying a new thing where I'm going to see if the chat will overlay on the game so I can see chat, because unfortunately we can't get it windowed. It is just full screen, so we'll see what we can do. I hope you'll stick around. I hope I'll see you in a few minutes. And if I don't, thank you for joining me. Bye.